Good luck and have fun indeed. And I love hearing from our family. And I think Ismael's father needs to give himself a little bit more credit. He actually did qualify for the World Championships previously. So that's the kind of level that Ismael's on to not need that kind of advice moving forward into this finals matchup.
Yeah, but I think being able to just go ahead and create your own path as a VG trainer at such a young age is such a joy to be able to actually witness. But of course, we do have a couple of the accomplishments from our great young trainers that we've already covered a bit before, but we're actually finally getting a bit of a visual comparison between the sort of teams that will be seen from either side. So we did mention Ismael does tend to be a bit more on the trick room oriented team archetype versus Takumi's take on balance with additional Dragonite and Sneasler support, which we've definitely seen really run amok in the current meta within the Masters division.
Absolutely. If you've been watching our Masters broadcast over the course of this tournament, Takumi's team will look very similar and familiar to you. This is a team that we've seen over and over again with some of these different components, always with a little bit of a unique take on it. Of course, that Dragonite with the multi-scale and the loaded dice scale shot has been a huge part of this tournament, alongside that Terra Fairy, Terra Blast, Volcarona.
Yeah, and at this point, it just makes so much sense because of the flexibility that it has available to itself, dependent on the matchup that is ahead of it. So we've got the setup sweeper, that being Volcarona, but I do want to call out choice specs, Golden Goat. We do normally see the nasty plot, at least with this team composition, tend to be more popular. However, it seems like Takumi is really honed in on wanting to have that immediate burst damage potential, and that's definitely a job that Golden Goat can do. And maybe even, let's say, if there's an Amoonguss on the other side, you can treat it as a very good immunity swap into any sort of Amoonguss type Pokemon on the other end.
Absolutely. Having the immediate impact of that choice specs can be huge to burst through defensive cores like Ismael has on his team. This is going to be a Porygon 2 team that we have seen a lot of as well, but this is much more of a classic Porygon 2 team with the Amoonguss Incineroar core and the Ursaluna. And of course, we can't ignore our friendly Flamingo, the Flamigo, right there as well.
I see what you did there. I definitely do like it, but I think this team core was actually quite popularized earlier on in the meta. However, I believe Matty Morgan actually was able to pilot this same 6 towards the finals of the Dortmund Regionals, our very second major of the season versus Davide Miraglia, and unfortunately wasn't able to get the prize at the time of the championship, but seems like Ismael's definitely trying to go for it and flagging that effort from Matty. But I do really like the composition here. Ismael may be a bit more tempted to go down the route of the Ursaluna, Incineroar, Porygon 2, and Amoonguss core because it just does so incredibly well, at least on face value, versus Takumi's Team 6.
Absolutely, and I think we have to point out some of the big calls here on Ismael's team, like substitute on Ursaluna. This is a Pokemon that if it gets a substitute up, it can do so much, but our players are ready. They know exactly what they want to do, and it's going to be Takumi Matsuo leading the Volcarona and Golden Go, where it's going to be Ismael Hoagie with the Incineroar Amoonguss. Classic defensive pivot lead.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do really like Takumi's approach on this, wanting to be able to identify, maybe if I go and get some setups going with a Volcarona whilst having some form of main damage input from, let's say, the second slot being that Golden Go, I could start wavering and taking advantage of the passive lead of that Incineroar and the Amoonguss. So generally speaking, you're really in a good spot where you could try to at least get some guaranteed damage, whittle down the HP of the Amoonguss, but that has to come to a cost of being in acknowledgement of that Incineroar, which may want to go on the offensive.
Well, if that Incineroar was going on the offensive, it will now be protected by a Terra Water Amoonguss alongside of it. Not just going to be stuck with that grass typing facing down the fire typing of the Volcarona, which instead will just be protecting, scouting out what Ismael wants to do. Will just be a knockoff though immediately into the Golden Go. Does not pick up the one-hit KO, but will knock off the choice specs. That means this Make It Rain will be both resisted on both Pokemon and have reduced damage because of the choice specs being gone.
Yeah, beautiful play from Ismael. Absolutely taking advantage of that turn one momentum. Early terror, but I think a very necessary one in order to allow Amundia so much more flexibility going into the second subsequent turn. Now, the Volcarona over on Takumi's side, at least that slot, is in danger of a Spore focus. Golden Go's no longer locked into choice specs, Make It Rain. However, it's just lost so much HP and momentum for itself. It may feel threatened enough to have to actually switch out.
Yeah, it has not only lost the choice specs, it also lost the special attack from the Make It Rain, which is why we're going to see Takumi retreating the Golden Go, just pivoting into the Incineroar. Now, this Incineroar is Rocky Helmet, not the safety goggles, which means that both Volcarona and Incineroar are threatened by a Spore from the Amoonguss. Terra Blast will target it down, but just do enough damage to activate the Citrus Berry, and this Amoonguss has more health now than it started the turn thanks to that Citrus Berry. Here's a parting shot, going to limit the damage from that Volcarona even further as Ismael pivots.
Yeah, and at this point, Ismael's really taking control of this board positioning. Takumi feeling like, at least if I'm going to be going down with a Volcarona focus or going to be losing the movement in the subsequent turn, let me just try to get some chip damage onto Amoonguss. But we've already seen how incredibly bulky this Pokemon is, and there it is. The Spore focus is on the Volcarona. Will have to, unfortunately, go through a mandatory turn of sleep in the subsequent turn, but this isn't looking primarily really good for Takumi. You need to be able to get some immediate focus pressure against such a bulky core with that Porygon 2 now on the field as well.
Yeah, and the Porygon 2 will be the pivot option from Ismael, which means there will be Trick Room threat. And with Golden Go at such low health, this Amoonguss probably feeling pretty safe to just be launching spores wherever it wants to go. Takumi has to use the first mandatory turn of sleep on Volcarona. As the Golden Go on the switch in, of course, the Good as Gold ability will prevent the Spore, but now Trick Room is up. And this Golden Go, it does resist everything that Ismael can do to it, but it's still at 45 hit points. That's not a lot.
No, definitely is not. And this is sort of the interaction we're talking about. You can utilize the Golden Go as a Spore switch in as long as you're able to position yourself quite nicely. However, Takumi really needs to be able to get that offensive pressure increased and up against Ismael's Pokemon, because I don't see a through line in order to be able to start picking up KOs. Take a note, the Regenerator ability is still available. If the Amoonguss wants to switch out, it just instantly regains a bit more of HP and becomes even tougher to be able to deal with moving forwards. But notice that Ismael hasn't revealed the fourth Pokemon yet, most likely on Ursaluna, and it could be coming in right now to proc the Guts.
Well, there it is. It's the Ursaluna switching in to hopefully proc that Guts. Porygon 2 just firing off a Terra Blast into Volcarona. The one bright side for Takumi is that the Porygon 2 only got an attack boost, but an absolutely free switch in for Ursaluna by tanking that Thunderbolt on the switch in will just be a tiny little bit of damage to that Porygon 2 from the Fiery Dance on Volcarona, which now will start recovering some of that hit points back with leftovers, but Ursaluna's on the field, and you're going to need a lot more recovery than that.
Oh, yeah, and at this point, this is looking really good for Ismael's momentum. Volcarona wasn't even able to get a secondary effect increase to its special attack thanks to the Fiery Dance there, and it's really in a point where it feels quite awkward, and it doesn't immediately threaten the damage to be able to, you know, make a dent in Ismael's core 4 right now.
Well, Takumi is doing a decent job of stalling out this Trick Room with that Protect. Will prevent the Facade from Ursaluna and allow the Golden Go to fire off a Make It Rain. Deals good damage to the Ursaluna even without the choice specs now that it has reset its special attack by switching in and out. But another Ice Beam will be plenty to pick up the KO on that Golden Go.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good reaction play from Takumi. Easily can see the Volcarona wanting to actually switch out, maybe get some Intimidate cycling going, and essentially waste out the remaining turns of Trick Room and pivot yourself to the point where you can start picking up those KOs, because Porygon 2 may be inclined to even go for a recover here, because I don't quite see what more it can do. You don't necessarily hate the Golden Ghost remaining on the field.
There's another facade into the Volcarona. The Incineroar's Intimidate is not enough to protect that Pokemon from the might of Ursaluna. Incineroar, though, will be able to tank this Ice Beam quite handily, and Ursaluna takes another turn of burn damage. Now, Takumi has Fake Out pressure on the field, which means that there will be the opportunity to continue stalling out these turns of Trick Room.
Yeah, and it seems like Takumi's actually trying to hone in on the aspect of the Golden Goat being that main offensive threat, and having the Rillaboom and Incineroar sort of act as that immediate support on the side. You've got the fake out potential, you've got, of course, the pivoting action going, the really good synergy between them. So I think you're just going to have to wait and stall out the final turn of Trick Room in order to bring that Golden Goat in. However, you need to guarantee the Porygon 2 is at low enough HP in order for the Golden Goat to come in and start doing its business and sweep.
Yeah, here comes the Incineroar to get Intimidates down onto both Takumi's Incineroar and Rillaboom. We are going to run out of Trick Room turns here, which means that Ismael is going to need to get another Trick Room set up. Planning for that, Porygon 2 will recover to heal up all of the chip damage that it has taken so far, as Incineroar just gets a knockoff on the Incineroar on the switch-in, which will just knock off the safety goggles, which does not matter in this set whatsoever. Just trying to get damage down on that Ursaluna.
And to be completely honest, as much damage as you can deal on the Incineroar is super key, because there's no direct way to be able to damage it. As importantly, except of having that power gem on the Golden Goat, because Rillaboom doesn't even have a ground type access to itself to be able to. It's got the U-turn instead on this Assault Vest set. So it's more so around, is there a direct way that you can break the Porygon too? Because after that recovered grassy terrain, it really feels like Ismael's just going to set up another Trick Room and pivot, get that Ursaluna back in order to sweep. But ouch!
That's the big offensive threat now off the field. Golden Goat switches in and gets knocked out by the knock-off. Takumi, though, will go for the parting shot, which means that the Rillaboom will get to come back in here, threaten Fake Out once again, and the Incineroar will also come back in. That means that the pivots are done for, though. These are the final two Pokemon for Takumi.
Yeah, and at this point, I do feel like this is pretty much over for a game one, because you've still got all four of your Pokemon on Ismael's side. You've just set up Trick Room. You've got the Ursaluna in the back. You just need to make sure that you bring it safely onto the field, and maybe even waste away the grass terrain turns in order to avoid any grassy glide priority coming out and threatening it, especially because I believe it was at less than half of its HP. So you just got to be a bit more patient from Ismael's side in order to be able to just waste away Fake Out initial pressures and just get that pivot action going.
Absolutely. Making sure to waste this grassy terrain is going to be key for Ismael to protect that Ursaluna. The Ursaluna and the Amoonguss are the only reasons that Takumi has not terrestrialized that Rillaboom into the water typing so far. So if those Pokemon can be dealt with, the water Rillaboom could be pretty strong here, but Ismael's just going to switch out the Porygon 2, going to bring back in the Amoonguss. This, of course, Amoonguss under Trick Room. The Incineroar can still be spored and put to sleep. The Rillaboom cannot, but it's another knockoff into the Incineroar on Ismael's side. That is this Incineroar for Takumi's only attack. Has Will-O-Wisp, Fake Out, Parting Shot, and Knockoff, so that's all the damage it can do. Yeah, and that's really not enough in order to be able to most likely bring this back, especially since you allowed the Amoonguss to freely switch in there, and now all of a sudden you're in a point where you can easily put the Incineroar over on Takumi's side to sleep, as it doesn't have safety goggles, it does have Rocky Helmet, but you need to also just be able to start dealing some really good damage on the Rillaboom too, because like we've said, it can directly impact the Amoonguss and that Ursaluna with its grass typing. Well, the water terrestrialization has been forced out onto the Rillaboom now. We'll be able to resist Ismael's Flare Blitz coming out from Incineroar, but the Spore from the Amoonguss will connect onto Takumi's Incineroar. So Takumi does successfully get the Rillaboom in position where it is not spored on the terrestrialization turn and fires back a big wood hammer into Amoonguss. One hit KO. Terrain is still up, able to pick the mushroom off the field, gobble it all up, and now Takumi has some momentum.
Yeah, although this does give a free switch in to Ismael, you can easily bring in the Ursaluna here, and especially with that parting shot, rather than it being a flare blitz, it's such a nice play from Ismael, because now, not only have you dropped Rillaboom's attack to -1, you've got Fake Out immediately available right next to that in Ursaluna, and you're just going to start sweeping right now because, like we said, there's no protects on either Incineroar and Rillaboom. You are under Trick Room, and at the moment, you just need to be able to just pick up those crucial KOs whilst not having any impact on your own attack.
Absolutely, you have the Fake Out pressure now from the Incineroar. You also now have another Intimidate.
Yep.
Not just the parting shot drop onto the Rillaboom, but another Intimidate coming out as well. Rillaboom is not going to be too happy about that. Goes for a Desperation Grassy Glide, but the Fake Out will just prevent any of that from happening. And Ursaluna now firing off a Facade into the Incineroar. No chance to wake up. Takes the damage from the Rocky Helmet, which will add up with the burns of damage that Ursaluna has been taking, but too little, too late. Still too much time in Trick Room, still too much momentum and power on Ismael's time, and not enough on Takumi's.
Yeah, and I mean, even if, let's say there's a scenario the Ursaluna went down there, you still have the Porygon 2 to contend with whilst having the Incineroar parting shot support by your side, and being able to sustain yourself with that recover further on just means that this is essentially a game that's already been over, but it will just be bringing it down to the next level as Facade goes ahead, wraps things up, and Ismael is 1-0.
Ismael cleans up the board with that Facade, knocks out Rillaboom, and is only one game away from becoming an international champion. Takumi is on tournament life here, needs to win 2 in a row. And I think that first game showed just how difficult a matchup this can be for Takumi. Props to him for making it interesting there, but so many options, even just from the Amoonguss there.
Yeah, and I think something we really do have to call out, both of these young trainers have faced each other already before this set in, of course, this tournament, where Ismael was able to win in Swiss round number 6. It was their first time ever that they went up against each other, and you can see that Ismael has a really good grasp on what needs to be done, what sort of lines they need to follow in terms of being able to dismantle Takumi's team, and we just saw that executed to a very high level in that game 1.
Absolutely, and you can see from the Swiss rank records that are on your screen, that means that Ismael was the only loss that Takumi suffered so far in this tournament, and is one game away from doing it again. I think this was such an interesting start, leading with the Volcarona and the Golden Go, and I think that makes a lot of sense from Takumi, just trying to get as much offensive pressure on the board as possible. And even being able to survive that knockoff is pretty huge for the Golden Go. Could come in and switch around before. Maintaining a Spore immunity on the team is critical against this Porygon 2 Amoonguss core.
I would very much like to see a Quiver Dance, though. If we do see a same lead from Takumi, you want to be able to at least start reaching a point where you can have both of your Pokemon become a main threat that Ismael has to immediately respect, because we see that initial turn of getting the Trick Room set up guarantee with the Incineroar and the Porygon 2 by its side is in order to enable that Ursaluna, but no Porygon 2, a switch up already, but none so ever from Takumi.
Yeah, well, let's run it back. Let's get the Amoonguss and the Incineroar. Let's get the Volcarona and the Golden Go on the field. Let's see what we can make happen this time around. And I think you're so right. The Volcarona just did not end up being that offensive threat that you really needed out of it. But here we go. We are right into it on turn 1. Once again, Terra Water on the Amoonguss. This Amoonguss now will be very difficult for the Golden Go and the Volcarona to break.
Yeah, and that's sort of the purpose of the Amoonguss in this situation, a matchup based off of course, that game 1 scenario. Knockoff does come out once again onto the Golden Go, now leaving it on 53 hit points. But we see a change up, the read, Thunderbolt straight into the Amoonguss, but not quite enough.
There's some good damage onto the Amoonguss. Another Thunderbolt will be plenty to pick up the KO, but without the choice specs, not enough for the one hit there after the fiery dance. Volcarona, though, will be put to sleep on turn 1 this time as Amoonguss sees the spore of the Pokemon that can be spored and says, I will click spore.
I do really like that read from Takumi's side, but if you're going to make a read, you might as well commit. And I feel like a Terra Fairy, Terra Blast there may have just been enough, perhaps, but you have to obviously be aware of the Citrus Berry recovery. That's why Citrus Berry, Amoonguss is such a big threat. It just throws any sort of damage calculations askew.
Yeah, and some critical information about speed tiers for those players as well, with the Incineroar getting the knockoff first, making sure that there would be no choice specs boost on there. Here comes the Porygon 2 once again, this time getting the attack boost on the download once more as Takumi has to waste that turn of sleep. The knockoff onto Rillaboom will knock off the Assault Vest, which means that this Porygon 2 is a pretty big threat to the Rillaboom now.
Yeah, being able to have Ice Beam coverage there is quite nice, and it may even force the Rillaboom to consider the Terastallization. So at this point, Ismael just is in a position where it could either go for the Trick Room or straight for the damage. However, you want to be able to, now with the adaptations Takumi's made, try to get that mode enabled, maybe bring in safely that Ursaluna. I wouldn't put it past them to actually go for the parting shot.
Yeah, well, the Terastallization from Rillaboom means it is now vulnerable to Spore, so needs to stop Trick Room from getting set up however possible. And right now, that was just fake out and hope that Volcarona wakes up. And unfortunately, it did not. However, the Water Terra typing will protect itself from that Flare Blitz, which means there will be one more turn where Takumi is able to target down that Porygon 2 with both the Rillaboom and maybe, just maybe, that Volcarona.
Yeah, and I think Takumi just needs to try to go ahead and get that weight right now. You want to be able to at least exercise some threat and immediate pressure with that fiery dance, actually. A bit of chip damage, obviously, but you got the potential of a special attack increase, which we do not see, though.
Yeah, no special attack increases either times that Volcarona went for the fiery dance, which means that that Porygon 2 tanks it pretty easily. And now the Incineroar gets to parting shot the Rillaboom to drop the attack even further and make this Porygon 2 feel much safer. Here comes the Ursaluna, though. Ursaluna on the switch and could be threatened by the Woodhammer, but instead just targeting down the Porygon 2, and that Porygon 2 is so happy to set up Trick Room with his best bear friend right by its side.
Oh yeah, and that's why it's so detrimental when you're going up against this mode that you need to make sure that you're actually removing that flexibility of having the parting shot Trick Room set up in order to immediately bring that Ursaluna primed and ready to pick up the KOs. It is very interesting to call out the Incineroar being faster than the Rillaboom. I think, like we mentioned just before, you're able to get that early parting shot to reduce the attack output of the Rillaboom. It had to get a crit in order to pick up a KO, and that's why we're actually seeing the switch out for that pivot action.
Yeah, more pivoting, more intimidates, doing whatever possible to keep this Ursaluna in check by whatever means necessary. Takumi will go ahead and protect the Volcarona. Just, again, has to stall out these turns of Trick Room, but Ismael is not falling for it. Just catches Incineroar on the switch-in with a Facade. Deals huge damage to Incineroar, and Porygon 2 is back to full.
Yeah, sustaining all of that HP, being able to essentially have a full 100% HP recovered. Porygon 2 is not a point that you want to be able to be at if that is on the opposing side of the field, because right now, all you need to do is just try to commit to playing defensively. If you're Takumi, maybe try to get that Golden Ghost switched in, anticipating a Facade in that slot. I think that's the only reaction you could try to go for, because you need to try to outlast these remaining turns of Trick Room.
Yeah, anything to outlast the Trick Room with Ursaluna, with Guts activated already. Ooh. And Ursaluna does go for the Facade, will be negated by the Ghost typing of the Golden Go, and actually the Terra Blast coming out, dealing a little bit of damage to the Ursaluna, not one of Takumi's Pokemon, as the Fiery Dance finally gets a special attack increase on this turn of Trick Room. So one more turn of Trick Room has been wasted here as Takumi gets a lucky break there and is able to survive.
Yeah, that may have potentially been a misclick there, but the state of the matter remains, like we mentioned, one final turn of Trick Room remains. You need to be able to now, if you're Takumi, bring in that fake out pivot, probably going to be an Incineroar in order to reduce the damage output yet again of the Ursaluna, but that's taking into consideration you're probably going to lose it. So that immediately means subsequently you're going to have the Rillaboom fake out pressure, but there's no defensive play on the Volcarona. It's out for the count.
Yeah, Volcarona is just down to another Facade, and Porygon 2 is stuck Terra Blasting into the Golden Go.
Wow.
Which will be able to fire back finally with a Make It Rain, and Ursaluna has been removed from the board for the first time this set.
Yeah, and of course this will invite the fake out users to come in. Probably going to be the Incineroar, although you got the option of going for that straight damage onto the Porygon 2, and that's why Rillaboom is such a great key piece here, but you're going to have to contend with that opposing Incineroar. Obviously, we've got Golden Go immune to the fake outs, but it's at -1 special attack. It doesn't have its choice specs. I don't think it has the necessary firepower in order to dispatch of this Porygon 2, which can easily close out this game as long as it's got that core of Incineroar and Amoonguss right by its side to support it.
Well, Takumi has found a way back into this, but you're right. Golden Go without that special attack, with that special attack drop, without the choice specs, just isn't going to be hitting as hard as you really want. And for this, the final turn of Trick Room, Porygon 2 once again gets to recover all the way back to full health. Now, this fake out into Incineroar means that there will be no move made on Ismael's side this time, but that was a pitiful Thunderbolt. Porygon 2 loves tanking those all day, every day.
I think at this point, Takumi was probably hoping for paralysis, because at that situation, that's...
Or catch the Amoonguss.
Or catch the Amoonguss, exactly, because you really need to be able to just start whittling down Ismael's side that's just so healthy. And of course, benefiting off of the grass terrain doesn't make things easier for Takumi either.
And of course, with the terrestrialization on Rillaboom, this Amoonguss has plenty of opportunities to target down Takumi's side with Spores. Takumi does finally retreat the Golden Go to reset the special attack and bring in the Incineroar to get the Intimidates down onto Ismael's Incineroar, able to tank a Flare Blitz because of that, as now taking more damage from Recoil and Rocky Helmet than it dealt to Takumi. While Rillaboom re-pivots here, U-turns out, and Golden Go's coming back in.
Yeah, this is actually really nice because you're trying to be able to set up the board where you at least have one fake out user by the side of Golden Go in order for you to be able to actually go ahead and get any sort of damage dealt with, because like we know from this Porygon 2, there's no direct solid way to be able to pick up a KO on the Golden Go. The only option is going for the Ice Beam, man. We already saw it's not enough to pick up the KO from that 86 hit point range.
Yeah, and critically, this was a choice specs Golden Go, which means it does have more attacking options than just Shadow Ball and Make It Rain. It has Power Gem, so it is threatening the Incineroar on the opposite side, which will be faked out immediately. Porygon 2 tries to pick up the Incineroar on the opposite side with Terra Blast, and it does. But this Golden Go hitting a super effective Power Gem without choice specs needs this to KO, and it does!
Oh, and it does. What a key play in order to be able to finally dispatch of that fake out user pivot cycle that we've been seeing. And now you're going to be able to bring in your Rillaboom. Whilst we have already known you've got the fake out pressure, you've got that Water Terra Amoonguss on the other side of the field. You can finally start threatening it. However, something to also call out, I believe Rillaboom did lose its Assault Vest earlier, so it's going to be taking a bit more damage than it typically would.
It will take more damage, but this Golden Go has been sitting on grassy terrain for so long. It has recovered so much health already. And with only the options of Terra Blast that will do nothing to Golden Go, Ice Beam that does negligible damage, and Pollen Puff on the Amoonguss, there is not anything that can quickly pick up a KO on this Golden Go.
Although
the Ice Beam, fingers crossed for a freeze if you're one of Ismael's fans out there, as this Thunderbolt just barely misses the KO on the Amoonguss.
Wow, but this already leaves the Rillaboom to be able to pick off that Amoonguss with a Grassy Glide. I think, like you correctly identified there, Evan, Ice Beam Freeze feels like it has to be the play in order to slow down that Golden Go and hope you can out-sustain it going outside of Trick Room in the following turn. So this is going to be quite crucial, and there's no actual adaptation there. It's just going to be the straight KO onto the Mushroom, leaving Porygon 2 on its lonesome self.
Yeah, Rillaboom making the most of the grassy terrain while it's got it. Picks up the KO onto Amoonguss with that grassy glide. Another Ice Beam onto Golden Go, gets the freeze!
Oh, wow!
It is a warm summer day here in Brazil, but not for Golden Go, which is going to be spending the turn frozen.
That is not a good place to be in if you're Takumi, because you need to be able to out damage this Porygon 2. Obviously, we saw the Ice Beam isn't as effective, but it's the fact that if it accumulates over time, you give it an opportunity, 3 or 4 Ice Beams, it may well actually be able to finish it off, but the Rillaboom is still available, does have grass may not have grass terrain, but the important thing is you want to be able to start picking up the damage as fast as you can.
While still targeting down the Golden Go, dealing 26 damage that time around means 2 more Ice Beams will do it as Rillaboom goes for the offense. Wood Hammer onto Porygon 2, Golden Go. It's just chilling, man. It's just chilling, letting Rillaboom do all the work this time.
It quite literally is. In this scenario, it just needs to wake up. You want to be able to force so much immediate pressure, not allow the recover to come out. There it is, it's forward. Thunderbolt into the Porygon 2. You just need to be able to put it within a range. It feels like you have to go or you're done for the critical hit, and you just put down the KO and you force a game 3.
Game 3 for the Latin American International Championships. Incredible. Takumi finding a way out there, managing to preserve that Golden Go, firing off some really critical attacks into the Amoonguss and the Porygon there at the end. Incredible play. We are going to a game 3.
Oh, yeah, we are. And in what fashion as well. Takumi absolutely piloting that incredibly, even with the RNG against himself there with that freeze. But I think we were talking a bit about the adaptations. That turn 1 read into the Water Terror felt so appropriate for Takumi to be able to start this set on a good foot. Although we did see Ursaluna at some point, it just took too much damage to the point where it wasn't able to essentially get its sweep set up. Takumi dealt with that threat so incredibly well. You got the Intimidate cycles going. You made sure the Fake Out was always available, if not on every second turn, on every third. And you're able to get that pivot cycle going with the Rillaboom and Incineroar. And that's such a key way to be able to slow down the momentum over from Ismael's core 4.
Yeah, and a couple of really key things that Takumi did there. I think he identified that Ismael, with that Ursaluna, was leaning towards the facade, never clicking headlong rush, which meant that Golden Go could switch in there and waste one of those turns to the normal immunity. And here we go. Number 3, game number 3. The leads are the same. Both players have taken a win with this setup. It's going to come down to this.
Yeah, and it's going to be very close as well, given how that game 2 went. And now there's so many different mind games. Volcarona, of course, as we saw, is always threatened by that Spore. It doesn't have any sort of way to be able to avoid it unless it's a direct switch into a Rillaboom. However, you've got the main damage potential from this Golden Go. You want to be able to either go for a read and go for yet another Thunderbolt into the Amoonguss, or perhaps try to start focusing down with the Power Gem into the Incineroar, which would have been a good option.
Well, here is an adjustment here. Takumi has taken so much damage turn 1 from Knockoff each and every game so far. Now, with the Water Terastallization, will not take quite as much damage this time around, but it will be the Water Terastallization on Amoonguss as well. Both the Incineroar and the Amoonguss resisting the Make It Rain, while just another Protect coming out from Takumi's Volcarona.
Yeah, just defensive there, wanting to make sure that you cannot be susceptible to these spores, but more importantly, this Terra allows the Golden Go not to take so much damage. It's lost its specs, but at least it's dealt a bit of chip damage, and it still has a lot more room of maneuverability going towards the next steps of this game. 115 hit points is a much better place than, I don't know, like 57 or around that 60 mark. Yeah, if that, exactly.
And this is really interesting too, because the Golden Go now did a little bit of chip damage to the Amoonguss. One of the things you have to deal with Citrus Berry is I don't want to proc Citrus Berry. I just want to make sure that we are getting the KOs cleanly as possible.
Yeah.
So could be setting up for some interesting little damage calcs here.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always the chance of, I would say rain, but in this case paralysis, if you want to opt in for that Thunderbolt. No switch outs from Ismael, just a fiery dance targeting that slot.
Just over 50% health on the Amoonguss. Gets the special attack boost too. That's a huge deal for this Volcarona. Flare Blitz does not deal a lot of damage into the Golden Go thanks to that terastallization. Here comes the Thunderbolt. Has the Make It Raindrop and no choice specs. Not enough to pick up the KO. Amoonguss will hold on just barely and eat that Citrus Berry.
Yeah, and this is why it's so crucial to be able to identify which move you want to go for in that turn 1 scenario. If there was a power gem perhaps, then at least you would have made sure that you guarantee not dropping your special attack, going into the knockoff interaction in the subsequent turn, and that would have most likely been able to pick up the KO if there was that Thunderbolt that freed up the slot from being choice locked. But now Volcarona is asleep. At least you've still got a board where you're facing an Incineroar and an Amoonguss, and you can start trying to capitalize off of the passiveness. But we've seen Ismael, the way that they've been playing, probably want to start getting that Porygon 2 and Ursaluna mode going, start the pivots, you get the regenerator, healing, parting shot, and all of a sudden you could even have an Ursaluna right next to a Porygon 2 at the very next end of this turn.
Well, Golden Go is not going to be on the field. Takumi wants to continue to preserve that key piece of his comeback in Game 2. Incineroar will switch in, meaning that there will only be an Intimidate onto the opposing Incineroar, of course, as well as the Amoonguss, but it will just switch out as well, activate the Regenerator ability, heal more health, and here comes Porygon 2 out here trying to set up the Trick Room for the Ursaluna, most likely in the back. Volcarona just keeps on snoozing. Volcarona, it's finals, wake up! As Incineroar goes for a parting shot to immediately remove that boost that it received from the Fiery Dance.
Yeah, and at this point, you're just setting up your board quite nicely, being able to take advantage of that additional turn of sleep. You can easily start rotating. Let's say just make sure that you've got the Ursaluna proc of the Flame Orb into Guts, and even start pivoting around. You could go for a Protect, you could either even bring in the Incineroar once again. As long as you're able to just reduce the damage output of Takumi's side, you're in a good spot. You've got that sustained strategy in order to be able to capitalize off of it. And something to note as well, all of the download boosts so far have been attack. They have not been special attack, which is so crucial as we see the Volcarona wake up.
Volcarona heard me. It woke up and went for a Fiery Dance, dealing a little bit of damage to that Ursaluna. Of course, every piece of chip damage on that Pokemon matters. This is the biggest offensive threat on Ismael's team, and it has just taken a hit for the first time this game as Rillaboom comes in to replace Incen.
And the fact that Ismael wanted to go for the offensive play with the Ursaluna, not want to go for that safe Protect Trick Room, really means that Ismael wants to start wrapping things up because of the -1. Not enough to pick up the KO onto the Volcarona, but the Trick Room is now on the field, and Ursaluna is still within a slot where it's quite nicely placed in order to start sweeping. However, -1 attack, you need to potentially consider switching out.
It's a -1 attack, but also this Rillaboom just set up grassy terrain, can start launching grassy glides into the Ursaluna and basically into everything on Ismael's team except for Incineroar.
Yeah, and I think in this scenario, Ismael can easily want to try to bring that Incineroar back in. However, you really need to focus on the nature of this Volcarona. It hasn't been going as much for the setup move of Quiver Dance. It's been hoping for the boost via the Fiery Dance, whilst at the same time in parallel, dealing the chip damage required. And there it is. Ursaluna switches out saying, no, I want a bit of a break right now. I want to be able to get that Incineroar cycle going as there we have it. Second Incineroar says, yeah, I want a bit of that as well. Let me join in.
We've already had first Incineroar, but what about second Incineroar? As the Intimidate actually landing most critically for Takumi's side. getting the Intimidate down onto Ismael's Incineroar, which means that those Flare Blitzes and knockoffs will not be quite as effective. And another turn where Volcarona is just protecting, just stalling out these Trick Room turns, and Ismael is trying to focus it down.
Yeah, and being able to have the compounding effect of the grassy terrain recovery with those leftovers mean in a couple of turns it's just going to be so healthy to the point where it can actually start setting up as long as you're outside of Trick Room and there's no direct threat on the other side, obviously looking at you, Ursaluna.
We're all looking at Ursaluna in this game. When Ursaluna isn't on the field, we're all asking, where's Ursaluna? Bring Ursaluna back. But here, we have the setup here. Incineroar has Fake Out, prevents Porygon 2 from going on the offensive with a Terra Blast. Instead, just a Flare Blitz from Incin. Not enough! 8 hit points! The Intimidate and the Grassy Terrain and Leftovers recovery have kept the Volcarona up on the field, and a Terra Blast into the Incin, a critical hit. Deals good damage right back.
Yeah, and that's so important to be able to start whittling down the HP of these super bulky Pokemon. Sure, there's grass terrain on the field. The fact that the Volcarona survived is so crucial for Takumi because you can best try to utilize that even towards the mid to end game scenario that we're very quickly approaching, and just try to capitalize off of coming outside of Trick Room, making that the bait in order for the Goldengo to come back in and start trying to sweep.
Well, and here is a big turn. Volcarona protecting again. Ismael is continuing to target down that Pokemon as Takumi is continuing to protect it from any attacks. And the knockoff, knocking off Porygon 2's Eviolite is so huge. That is where Porygon 2 gets its strength, gets its defensive stats from that Eviolite, and without it, it is now much more vulnerable to big attacks like Wood Hammer and Grassy Terrain.
Yeah, and that's huge for Takumi because now you know that the previous damage calculations are slightly off, to say the least, obviously. 50% to your physical defense and special defense is so big for such a bulky Pokemon at that. Ursaluna is now, however, back on the field, but being able to have Volcarona quickly recover its HP and just try to last the remaining turns left of Trick Room in order to better place your Goldengo is such a really cool strategy and take on being able to try to utilize such a setup sweep potential set.
Yeah, a couple important differences here though. The Goldengo has Terastallized, which means there is no immunity to Facade. Facade is now extremely safe for this Ursaluna to go for on basically any Pokemon, and it has not been intimidated.
No, and that's so crucial because obviously you pretty much see a KO with a Facade as long as you don't see a Protect. Incineroar switching out, wants to try to make sure it gets that pivot going, and it seems like Takumi is willing to lose the Rillaboom potentially, but double switch, however, Goldengo might actually be the bait here.
Willing to lose any one of these Pokemon here as Goldengo switches in, but Ursaluna's Facade will connect on Rillaboom, and that picks up a one-hit KO. Takumi's biggest offensive threat into the remaining Pokemon of Ismael Hoagie has gone down in a double KO. The Terra Blast is enough to pick up the Goldengo on the switch in as well. That means it is just Volcarona and just Incineroar left, and I don't know if they have the damage to break through this Porygon 2 even without the Eviolite.
Yeah, this is going to be incredibly difficult. The fact that Ismael's 4 Pokemon are so bulky gives another dimension to the feeling of, okay, well, it's not just 4 Pokemon. It could count like a 5th Pokemon or a 6th because of how bulky it is. It's seeing the deficit right now. 4 versus 2 is not where you want to be with Takumi. You don't even have a setup already available on your side. Sure, you do have Fake Out. You are going to be able to slow things down a tiny bit over Ismael's side. You've got an Intimidate, most crucially, on the Ursaluna. Probably going to be able to survive with an Incineroar, but you only have 1 Fake Out. And at this point, Ismael probably sees a KO on the Volcarona with both Porygon 2 as well as that Ursaluna.
Yeah, these are all tasty KOs on the board, but Ursaluna will just retreat, trying to make sure that things are safe for Ursaluna the next time it shows up. Intimidate will connect onto the Incineroar, while Porygon 2 most likely trying to be protected from an all-out assault. Instead, just the Fake Out here, as Porygon 2 will be unable to set up Trick Room, and Volcarona goes for a Fiery Dance. It's just a little little bit of damage into that Incineroar, but not get another special attack boost critically as well.
Yeah, I love this play because this was the super safe play in order to have that fake out available in the subsequent turn, get the Trick Room set up without being directly threatened of a KO onto your Porygon 2 outside of, let's say, a critical hit from a knockoff. But even at that case, you're not going to be able to get rid of the Porygon 2, even with the EV Light loss. You just need to be able to set up Trick Room yet again. Ursaluna comes in and Sweep City begins.
Yeah, and because that Incineroar on Ismael's side has proven to be extremely fast, the fake out pressure is largely just on Ismael's side now. And actually, because the Incineroar already used fake out, it totally is. So Volcarona is left protecting, being passive and unable to get any damage off. Would not have dealt anything anyway because of the fake out, but it all comes down to what damage this Incineroar can do. In fact, it will do none. The damage it's doing is stat-based, hoping to make sure that Takumi can stall out as many turns of this Trick Room without giving Ismael a free switch into that Ursaluna.
Yeah, this is looking incredibly dire to the much of the point where I don't see a clear win condition from Takumi's side. You needed to be able to have a lot more HP available for Volcarona whilst having additional special attack boosts to really make it a threat in order to pick up those KOs, because the fact that Porygon 2 without an Eviolite can't get KO'd right now is incredibly bad, as it's not even able to pick up the Volt.
Yeah, can't pick up the Volcarona, the knockoff, not enough to pick up the Incineroar either, even with the boost from holding the safety goggles, and the Flare Blitz will just clean it up for Ismael, and Ismael is one Pokemon away from becoming your Latin American International Champion.
All it needs right now is for Ismael to pick up the Incineroar without support. It is on its own. Takumi, at this point, has so many of their resources wasted, and we've got Ursaluna in Trick Room, fully ready to pick up the KO, and we have it. Ismael Hogi is your Latin America International Champion of the Junior Division.
Yeah, the Ursa King gets its crown finally. Ismael, having been a finalist last year at the European International Championships, will finally add a championship title to his resume.